All right, I think we're going to start. Welcome to everyone. Yes, I just got a note that Charlotte's in Miami Beach. Oh, poor thing. And we hope you're not suffering too much. So welcome to everybody. We are today going to look into this very fascinating, all the Parshiot of Breshit are extremely interesting and are multifaceted and multi-topics. We're going tonight, this afternoon, this morning, depending where you are, we are going to try to understand this man of mystery named Eliezer. You know, the Torah has very powerful personalities. At the same time, there are a lot of individual personalities. They're not quite at the top rung like the matriarchs and patriarchs or Moshe, but they're kind of like in any play or movie, you've got supporting actors and actresses, and they often make the whole story. Eliezer plays a big part in today's Parsha of Sarah, and we all essentially know the story. Abraham needs to find a shidduch, a match for his son Yitzchak. This is after the Akedah. Yitzchak, as we talked about in last week's Parsha sheet, although there are a lot of different opinions, the majority opinion is that he's 37 years old. He needs a woman. He needs a wife. And Abraham, being 100 years old, well, he can't really go out and do much active matchmaking. So he has his faithful servant Eliezer. And we're going to try to dissect and understand something about this individual Eliezer. All we really seem to know about him from the text is that he is Abraham's trusted manservant, so to speak. Maybe you could say his valet, his secretary, whatever name and title you want to assign to him. He has a very fascinating background. He actually, and again, we have to fill in the blanks by depending on the Medrash. The Medrash tells us that he was the son of Nimrod. Now, Nimrod is a very interesting and shady character. He has an association with Abraham because he is the one who wanted to throw Abraham, with, it seems, the consent of Abraham's parents, into a fiery furnace because Abraham was a rabble rouser, a revolutionary, someone who rocked the boat and who wanted to preach to the world against the prevailing idea of idolatry. So basically, the town wanted to get rid of him. And so Nimrod, who was the ruler, actually gave him a choice: either give up this belief in one God, return to a belief in idolatry, which it seems like Abraham may have initially had, or I will throw you into a fiery furnace. And Abraham is a believer, and he has a lot of guts, and he says, okay, I'm not going to go back to a life of idolatry. If you're going to throw me in the furnace and I'll lose my life, I'll do it in the dedication and the sacrifice to God, and nothing happens to him. There's a whole other story that Abraham's brother did the same, but he got burned up. I'm not going to go there because we're not talking about that. It's another interesting medrash. But at some point, Nimrod kind of wanted to make up for what he had done. And so he sees Abraham is a force to be reckoned with. And he tells his son, Eliezer, you go and serve Abraham. This is kind of reminiscent to some extent of the story of Hagar, because Hagar was a princess and it was really kind of beneath her station to be the maidservant to Sarah. But there too, essentially, she felt and she was told better to be a servant in the royal house than to be a princess or even a queen in some other dynasty. So here too, Eliezer, although he is the quote unquote servant of Abraham. Nevertheless, he comes from a very distinguished background. Nimrod was this kind of dictator type and also a force to be reckoned with. Well, what can we say about Eliezer? In the story, which I think are familiar with, he is going to go to Aram Naharaim, which is where Abraham comes from in the land of Canaan, and he's going to ultimately find Rivka, right? I don't want to spoil the ending, but you all know that. But we want to try to understand where Eliezer is coming from. What kind of a person is he? And there's some very positive things to say about him, in addition to the fact that he comes from a distinguished background. But even about some of what he accomplished himself, first of all, it's very hard to find any more potent and complimentary statement than what the Gemara says in the tractate of Derech Eretz. There it says 9 people merited immediate entrance to Gan Eden when they died. Normally, an individual would have to go through Din B'Cheshbon. You have to go through, a review of what you did in your life, and you would be judged, and you might have to even suffer some punishment, some tikkun. 9 people were told were so perfect that they just died, and boom, the next second they're in Gan Eden. And I won't go into the whole list, but the first one is in the story of Chanoch, who is one of the first people born. And he walked with God, and he was taken before his time. He was too good for the generation, and he's one of the people that went right into Gan Eden. Another one would be Eliyahu, because there we read that he never died. The chariot of fire took him. This is the original chariot of fire, not the movie. Took him to heaven. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Batya, the daughter of Paro, she's another one of them. And Serach, the daughter of Asher, granddaughter of Yaakov, who lived a long time, who by tradition is the one who broke the news to Yaakov that Yosef was alive. But one of these 9 people is Eliezer. So according to at least this source, he is a very high-ranking person in order to merit that kind of company. He also is the one who joined together with Abraham in order to fight against the 4 kings in Sodom, in order to rescue Lot. And there's a very interesting gematria that says that when Abraham fought this war, and this was back in last week's Parsha of Lech Lecha, and there, let me just see if I can find it really quickly. Well, Abraham goes to war, and it says that, let me just see if I can find the words, but basically it says that he took the young men with him. Well, according to, that's back in Lech Lecha, but according to the commentaries, Abraham actually didn't take a lot of soldiers with him when he went to this war. No, he only took one person, and that was Eliezer, who was apparently some great soldier. Let me just see if I can find that phrase. So Abraham says there that he hears what happened to his nephew or brother-in-law Lot, and he arms his disciple. And according to the commentaries, this phrase that he takes the members of his household to fight adds up to 318, and that's the gematria of Eliezer. So he must have been a very brave and valiant fighter. In fact, some want to actually say that, and this is again a medrash, that Eliezer is none other than Og. We know the story of Og. He's also a giant. Ultimately, Og Melech HaBashan, he's the king of this northern province. And at some point in a war, he will be killed by Moshe Rabbeinu. So Og is not a positive character. So that's why it's a controversial medrash, but it's much more complimentary to say that he went and he fought with Abraham in order to secure the release of Lot. So these are a lot of very, very positive accolades about Eliezer. And of course, he's successful in his mission to find a wife for Yitzchak. He goes to Aram Naharaim. He makes this oath that if there will come along a woman who, and again, we're not saying how there's a whole dispute about how old Rivka is at the time, because some wanted to say she was 3 and others say 12. A 12-year-old back then is different than a 12-year-old today, perhaps. But in any case, he makes this kind of condition that if this girl or woman will give water to him as well to his camels, that is an indication that she is the match for Yitzchak. Why this particular test? So the rabbis want to say that, without going into great detail, that Abraham wanted a sign. He wanted, first of all, it's his own family, and he wanted a sign that this is a person of chesed, of kindness, of good deeds, who acts in a compassionate fashion. Because without going into too much of a discussion on this, the rabbis ask, didn't Abraham and Sarah make many, many, many converts to the one God? So why not take one of them? Why go all the way to Canaan, which is a far journey, and to a place and a home where idolatry still existed, because Rivka's brother and father were idolaters? Why not choose one of those converts that they made? And this is not certainly meant to be a slur against anyone who they converted. But the answer of the rabbis is that while it's very meritorious to decide to join the fold and become Jewish, it's very difficult. While you can teach people religion, teaching people ethics and morals and midot, that's much more difficult. And therefore, Abraham said, I'd like to find someone for Yitzchak who is a very moral and a very a person with really a lot of spirit, and someone who cannot be intimidated, not a latecomer to Judaism, or a latecomer, again, we're talking pre-Judaism, but someone who really has a very, very fine character, and not just somebody who maybe because of our influence decided suddenly to believe in one God. So, but that's a whole other discussion. But Eliezer is successful, and he does find this woman, this girl named Rivka, and she does exactly that. So on the surface, Eliezer looks to be like a very positive person, and he fulfills his task. On the other hand, there are some very, let us say, suspicious issues here. This is a story that takes up no less than 67 verses. And there's a whole discussion by the rabbis, why is the Torah using so much space? The Torah never wastes space. So if the Torah is spending 67 psukim, there must be a good reason for it. And I'm not going to go into that. That's a whole other question we can discuss maybe next year on this parsha. But what stands out is that Eliezer's name is not mentioned even once. We're talking about Abraham and Rivka, and we mention Sarah, and we mention Abraham's brother, and we mention Lavan, who is the brother of Rivka, and we mention Betuel, who's the father of Rivka, but we don't mention Eliezer's name. We refer to him in different ways: the servant, the man, the messenger, but we don't even mention his name. And this obviously, in 67 psukim, this cannot be by coincidence. There has to be a reason for that. And so there's a dispute among the rabbis. Some want to say this was done to emphasize his sense of mission, that he wasn't in it for himself, and that this was a successful mission, not because of the merits of Eliezer, but it came from God. And even Eliezer says that it comes from God, and maybe spin it so it's a positive thing, like he wasn't looking for any glory himself, so his name isn't mentioned. But then there are others who go the other way and say that not only is Eliezer just the kind of instrument for this, but that it may be that Eliezer found Rivka in spite of himself, meaning that there was another agenda that Eliezer had. Yes, he had to go on the mission and the task set forth by Abraham. He couldn't get out of that, but he had something else lurking in his mind, and that is that he had a daughter, and he wanted very much for his daughter to marry Yitzchak. And his plan was, well, if I don't, and he even says this, what happens if I don't find the right person? Then what? So Abraham says, well, then you'll have to come back here and we'll see what happens. And of course, he would have very much liked to have his daughter marry. And he brings this up, by the way, according to the Medrash. And the Medrash says that he came right out and said to Abraham, but I have a daughter. Let Yitzchak marry my daughter. And Abraham says, you come from Canaan. That is an accursed nation. Remember in the story of Noah, without getting too deep into that, there is a curse put on Canaan. And that is where Eliezer descends from. And that's one reason. I'll give you another reason in a moment. And so Abraham says, no, that can't happen. But Eliezer is thinking, well, if I come back empty-handed without finding someone, then maybe Abraham will change his mind. And indeed, there is the Gemara talks about an interesting aspect of this, and this is in the 24th perek, the 39th pasuk. He says, Eliezer says that because this whole story is repeated. Abraham tells Eliezer where to go. Eliezer goes, and when he sees the family of Rivka, he repeats, here's where I'm from, here's what happened, here's what Abraham told me to do. And one of the things he says is, Vayomer la'adoni, I said to my master Abraham, Ulai lo telecha ishacharai. Maybe the woman will refuse to go. Yeah, maybe I'll find someone. I'll tell her to go. And indeed, by the way, her family tried to keep her back. It was only because Rivka had this courage, and whatever age she was, to be able to stand up to her brother, and we'll talk about Lavan in another stage, who was a very powerful figure, and say, I'm going. They want to keep her there. They want to keep the gifts that Eliezer brings from Abraham, but they want to have their cake and eat it too. But Rivka stands up and says, no, I'm going with Eliezer. I'm going back to Abraham and to Yitzchak to be married. But Eliezer uses this phrase, maybe she won't come with. But the word maybe, ulai, which is normally spelled aleph, vav, lamed, yud, is spelled here without the vav. And if you look at it, and you know the Torah has no punctuation, so if you look at the letters aleph, lamed, yud, instead of it reading perhaps she won't come with me, it can mean a lie. She should come with me because, or not, she should come with me, that Abraham will come to me, a lie, when I don't bring her back, and he'll have no choice essentially but to give in and let my daughter marry Yitzchak. Of course, the plan doesn't work because Rivka does say, I will go back, but the rabbis see a certain hidden agenda. Furthermore, this idea of making a test and saying, if I will find a girl who will give me water and my camel's water and do this, that, and the other, that will be a sign that she's the one. This is problematic. You are not supposed to test God. There is a commandment, even a mitzvah, that says, Lo tenasu et Hashem Elokecha. Don't test God. You're not supposed to say, God, if you somehow make it that tomorrow I trip over a pot of gold, then I'm prepared to do X, Y, and Z. You're not, God has the power to do these things, but you're not supposed to test God. There are exceptions. We see an exception by Eliyahu Hanavi in this story with the prophets of Baal. Remember where they set up this test, whether whose offering will be consumed by fire from Shamayim, and Eliyahu says this. Also, Moshe Rabbeinu does this and says, remember in the story with Korach, God, do something very, very unusual and stupendous to show an unusual kind of, it turns out to be a tragedy, but some unusual manifestation of God's power to show that Korach's wrong and I'm right, and the earth opens up, there's an earthquake right then, swallows up Korach, and you're not supposed to do that. And this is something which Eliezer does, but nevertheless is successful. And although he tests God and sets up this whole scenario to identify Rivka as the right one for Yitzchak, God does cause it to happen. So he shouldn't have done it. And therefore, they want to suggest he set up an almost impossible scenario. Who knows that he's going to find someone who does this exact thing, although he does. And according to this outlook on Eliezer, he's not such a hero. So you can have it either way. There's enough, there are enough clues and enough information to either say Eliezer is a true hero. I mean, we said he's going to go right into Gan Eden, or to think that, well, he did his job, but he would have liked it to have gone to another way. But the final question is, beyond this idea that we said that he comes from Canaan, and therefore, as Abraham said, I can't have someone from that kind of lineage, although Rivka comes from a family of idolaters, but at least they weren't branded as evil, as Canaan was, and cursed. And Abraham said, there's a curse on them, so I can't have that in my family. But is there anything else that Abraham saw that, yes, Yehudit says, we name people Eliezer. It's a beautiful name. It says, God help me. And so you can certainly, use the good information. But why didn't Abraham want Eliezer for Yitzchak, Eliezer's daughter for Yitzchak? And the answer goes back to a statement that that we said all the way back in Parshat Lech Lecha, when Abraham is complaining to Hashem, or he's moaning and groaning to Hashem and saying, I don't want to die childless. I want to have an heir, and not Yishmael. And there, the pasuk tells us that he uses a very strange phrase when he's talking to Hashem. And let me just find it for you. Let me find it. It's in the 15th perek, the second pasuk. And he says, when Hashem says, I'm going to give you all kinds of wonderful things, and I'll be your shield, your reward will be great. And Avram says, Mati Tainli, what good is all that? Vanochi olech ariri, and I go childless without an heir. I mean, you can't take it with you, so to speak. So if I don't have someone to pass it on to, what good is it? Uben meshek beiti, and this servant in my house, meaning Eliezer, hu damesek Eliezer. He's now called the Eliezer of Damascus. So the rabbis, it's a very strange phrase. So the rabbis question, what does this mean from Damascus? So one opinion is he came from Damascus. He was Syrian, and that's where he was living. And then Abraham was coming through, and this whole story, wherever Eliezer came from, but he originated in Damascus. Rashi, however, says something else. Rashi says that this phrase Damesek doesn't mean Damascus. It's not a place. It's a description. And Rashi says, what does it mean? It's a combination of two words, Damesek, Damascus. What are the two words? Dole umashke. Dole umashke mitorat rabol acherim. It means the li is a bucket, and Rashi wants to say he dips the bucket into the well and pours it out, meaning he takes the Torah, the wisdom, let's say, that he has picked up, and he transmits that. So whatever he heard from Abraham as his servant of many years, he can now just regurgitate that and give it over. Well, that shouldn't be a bad thing. And indeed, some interpret that very positively, that he was able to spread the word of Abraham, and he was able to give an accurate transmission of the Torah, the wisdom of Abraham. But others say it's not positive. And that Abraham says, I don't need someone to simply repeat everything I said. I want someone who will go further, someone who will add to what I'm saying, who will give a new dimension to, for lack of a better word, Judaism. Yes, it's wonderful to quote me, but we've got to always continually move forward. And you need people who will be innovative, creative, who can take everything I accomplished one step further. And therefore, he said, Eliezer is not the one to do that. He'll be a faithful servant. He'll give over everything I taught him, but he won't offer anything new. And we need to continually have new and creative and innovative ways of spreading the Torah, and maybe even in a sense, interpreting the Torah and in moving it forward. It's not enough just simply to quote somebody in the past, and that's all you have in your ammunition box, in your repertoire. You've got to be able to take it further, to say things and to create situations where you expand whatever came before. And therefore, Yitzchak has his own qualities to expand upon what Abraham did, and certainly so would Yaakov, and on and on and on throughout history. And that's what Abraham was saying. And that was his problem with Eliezer. He's a faithful servant, yes. But is he going to improve in a sense? Not necessarily improve, but add to what I've done. And that's a very, very fascinating idea, that we do need to cherish and certainly take inspiration from what has come in the past, from all of our great sages of the past. But we also have to consider, what can I do with my own unique individual talents to be able to somehow take it one step further? Because it can't remain frozen in time. And therefore, this was what Abraham was concerned about. And he was saying it in a subtle way by calling him Damesek Eliezer, and saying, yes, he's faithful. He'll spit out what I've taught him, but we need more than that. And in today's day and age, we have to take whatever we've been given, and we certainly have to respect it and use it as a springboard to go even further in order to meet the challenges that every new generation presents. So this is the story of the very, very mysterious man, Eliezer. We can certainly say good things about him, but at the same time, we understand that there were limitations to what and who Eliezer was. And as a result of that, we moved in a different direction. And he did his thing, so maybe he will enter Gan Eden with a perfect record, etc. But at the end of the day, Abraham, in his great wisdom, understood that I need something even more. And I have to have the kind of personalities that will not just retain, but also generate on their own the kind of wisdom and initiative and the kind of leadership that will move the nation of Israel along into the future. So I thank all of you for tuning in. And next week, we will be back, same time, same place. I'm rushing off a bit to this wedding, but we should all celebrate Smachot and have a wonderful Shabbat. And we will see you next week. Shabbat Shalom.